Hey there, welcome back to 16 Stops, a podcast. My name is Josh, and I'm here with Brandon. Brandon?
Oh, hey, Jay, what's up?
Yo, dude, I'm doing the podcast. Where are you, man?
No, man, we're good. I'm just doing a podcast prep, you call it. Prepping. No. Just start the intro. I'll be there in a second.
All right, let's try this again. Hey there, welcome back to 16 Stops, a podcast. My name is Josh, and I'm here with Brandon.
Konnichiwa, bitches.
All right, today in episode 13, we are going to talk about Canon's weirdest camera, the Canon R5C. All right, so we are pumped to talk about the R5C. We both own the R5C. And this is one of maybe a few episodes we're going to take deep dives into specific cameras. We think this is going to be cool. So for people that are interested in the camera, maybe have the camera, don't have the camera, just interested in our take on it, we'll do a deep dive. So
Yeah. Josh,
yeah, go ahead, man.
is it because this camera's so weird that we're doing a deep dive on it? Like, are there any other cameras already off the top of your head that you might want to deep dive later on?
Probably, but let's not get to that yet. I just think This is a weird camera, and it's worthy of a lot of discussion because it's very confusing. So I think that's kind of what spearheaded this idea. So before we get into it, Brandon, first of all, I see no neck brace. So how are you doing with everything?
Doing great. I had my follow-up yesterday, and MRIs came back negative, so I'm free and clear to go back into training.
Okay, so ice baths and energy drinks, is that the key?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Gotta finish this one off, actually.
All right, so before we get into news and rumors, of course, everyone's favorite segment, what did we buy? So, Brandon, what did we buy this week?
That's a great question. I bought a ND filter, a very tiny ND filter for this 16 2.8. I also bought a screen protector for the small HD monitor. This was like the most expensive screen protector ever. It was like $40. But I guess it's worth it because this is a very expensive monitor. But it did that thing where it gets a bubble, and I've been squeegeeing it all morning, and it won't come out.
That makes sense that thing costs $40. I'm surprised it didn't cost like $400 because that monitor is so expensive.
Well, I didn't buy it from Red, or it would have.
Okay. That's why I guess I was surprised. So not a big week in terms of buying stuff. I've been actually trying to get rid of things. I've been selling things lately, and maybe Tom Buck's voice in the side of my head is starting to wear on me, where he just makes fun of us for buying stuff constantly.
Josh, buy a 9-year-old camcorder.
I'd love to, man. I did buy one thing. I've been working on audio a little bit more lately, and so I bought a DBX 286S, which is like a preamp channel strip. It's got some onboard processing so that I can use it for live streaming and also just do less work in post, like get it right as close as possible in camera. So I am using that today, actually, to record this. So
very nice.
Mixing it in with all the rest of my gear. I really don't know a lot about audio. I think most videographers and YouTubers and stuff kind of don't either.
Yeah, I don't know diddly squat, but it sounds like you're doing something. I don't know if you've heard of this quote. Nothing new on race day. Josh, are you doing something new on race day here?
Pretty much, yes.
All right.
And I know that.
Fire away.
I did do some, at least I tested it, and I am also recording in my Mix Pre 3, which I usually use. So that has 32-bit float. So
okay.
If anything happens, like I got a little wiggle room, I think. So we'll see, unless I screwed up my processing. But anyways, all right, so let's get on to news and rumors. The first thing is there is a little bit more information about the Canon RF third-party lens debacle. And there was like a weird interview quote type thing that came out, and it was translated. So of course we got some stuff lost in translation. I don't want to read the whole thing, but essentially it sounds like Canon is now in talks with third-party lens manufacturers to grant licensing. What that means exactly is unclear. Is it they're just talking with people? Are they pretending to let people like propose lenses and then not give them the licenses? Is this complicated? What do you think's going on here,
A
Brandon?
little courting, a little flirting.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I think in that statement, it was like, what is the criteria for being licensed? It's money. Let's be honest. It's just money. Do you have lots of money? And are you going to make lenses worse than we are? If so, come join the club.
Okay, so not to just continue on with our conspiracy stuff from last episode, but I agree that there's definitely a big part of this has to do with money, because most people don't know that manufacturers make more money on lenses than they do on bodies, is the way I understand it, because they make a lens and then they sell that lens for a long time, versus bodies they're constantly having to spend on R&D and stuff like that. So I think Canon's trying to recuperate some of the money in the RF system with lenses. But I also think with Canon, and this goes with some of the other stuff we might talk about later in this episode, is that Canon really does focus on trying to get really good quality, and they try to put high standards on their stuff. And so I'm wondering if part of this is just like, well, we're not going to let these companies do this until we're absolutely sure that, it's not going to make our cameras look bad, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'll buy that for right now.
But it's probably money.
The only reason I'm saying that is because, like, who was the first one to have, like, an autofocus lens? It was Mikey at NAB. And it's like, is really Mikey the brand that you want to, like, usher in this new era of RF third-party mounts? I thought it would be like Sigma or something.
Yeah, so let's talk about that lens. So I remember hearing that before we went to NAB, and then at NAB, I saw the Mikey booth like way in the back, and there was nobody there. And I'm thinking,
tumbleweeds.
Yeah, and I was like, if they had a new RF autofocus lens, don't you think people would be paying attention? There was nobody over there.
I think it's Mikey. I really, like, I don't know. I remember walking past it, and there was that one dude that was just kind of like, I wish somebody would come talk to me.
He should have been like, I have an autofocus RF lens over here. So the lens that we're talking about is a 85 f1.4 and does have autofocus. So until this point, I know they granted licensing to Cosina to make some manual focus lenses. So let's see if this comes out. It's rumored to come out fairly soon. I don't have a timetable on that. I haven't heard an exact date or a month or anything, but obviously we'd like to see Sigma get a shot at RF lenses, because all their new mirrorless lenses are great, like for Sony E-mount and L-mount and stuff. So that would be fantastic.
Let's go, Canon.
Well, they're just pretending, they're flirting, as you said. All right, so a couple other things. There's a new Laowa 24mm T8 2x macro probe lens that looks super cool and has multiple attachments and stuff.
Yeah, those are some weird lenses.
Have you ever get to play with one of those probe lenses?
I have not.
I feel like you need a slider if you have one of those. I feel like I always see the slider shots.
You probably want a slider, and then you need a metric butt ton of light.
Right.
So,
well, this is a T8, so
it's much faster, but you still need a lot of light.
You do. Yeah. Okay. There is also a rumor about a new fancy Canon lens. It is a 200 to 500 f4L stabilized.
Okay. So is that like Prius money, or is it?
What do you think, Brandon?
I'm going to say over 12 grand.
You're correct. 16,000 is the rumored price. And so
that's funny.
And so this is coming out, as the rumor said, Q4 of 2023.
All right.
So this seems like, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, we get another one of these kind of like weird lenses that we'll never, like, we're probably never going to use, for the most part, because our jobs don't need it. Does that frustrate you, given how many lenses, like a $16,000 lens is not like what the bell curve, is using? Like, where are the lenses like the 24s and the 35s and those sorts of things, like 1.4s, 1.2s? Have you gotten to the point where you're just like, God damn it, just give me the lenses?
Yeah, I think I have two schools of thought on this. Of course, I think the main school of thought is, where's the 24 and 35 RFL lenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think once those come out, I might start investing in those RF primes, and then because then there is a set there, and I can start working with it. But also, I love how Canon is really innovating in the lens department. Like, you see the 28 to 70 f2, nobody makes a lens like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That 100 to 300 2.8, that is a crazy cool lens. Again, very specific market, very expensive. Same thing with this 200 to 500. And these lenses will be out for a long time, and I think that they are really getting these out before we get the big boy cameras, which we'll talk about later on in the episode.
I agree. We've talked about this before. My idea, like when they started coming out with these super powerful, super expensive zooms, is you've got the Olympics coming up.
Exactly.
And in order for the people that they're giving R1s to shoot at the Olympics, they got to have the glass that goes with the camera. And so my theory is that they're pushing these out first. And once that system's complete and the Olympics goes off without a hitch and Canon gets all this praise, then they're going to start bringing out some of the other lenses that, the vast majority of people will probably buy into.
Yeah, imagine like an R5.2 or an R1 or whatever they come out with, and you go to the Olympics with a 100 to 300 f2.8 and a 200 to 500 f4. Like that's
yeah,
those are crazy cool professional lenses. All right, so Sony, we all have been keeping track of the rumored cameras coming out soon, the A7C Mark II and the A7C-R, but there's also rumored to be a new 16 to 35 G Master, so a Mark II.
I am going to wager that you're excited for this lens.
I am, and if I was using Sony more, I would be a no-brainer decision to pull the trigger on that, but
yeah,
I own the 16 to 35 GM Mark I, awesome lens. I don't have many complaints about that lens. It could use a little bit of improvement, and I'm sure they will improve it, but it's going to be a big upgrade financially for me to sell my Mark I and then buy a brand new Mark II.
How much do you think it's going to cost when it comes out?
It's probably going to be like $2,000, $2,200, somewhere in there, like the other GMs. I mean, how much? It's probably the same price as the 24 to 70 GM2, so whatever that is.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I'm sure it'll be a little smaller, a little lighter, optically a little bit better. So if I wind up doing more interior real estate stuff, then I'll probably pick it up. But for right this moment, I'll probably hold off.
Gotcha. All right.
Well, we'll see. It's hard, man. Those new lenses are so nice. All right, so Sony rolled out a new firmware for the FX6 version 4.00, and it
was massive update, huge, blows everybody away.
Kind of quiet, but it seems like they added what's in the FX3 to the FX6, which is like
they do some weird things over there at Sony.
Yeah, so let me talk about, I'll give you the highlights here. There's a lot of little stuff, but basically they added anamorphic D-squeeze, which was weirdly not in the FX6. I don't understand that. That's super weird.
Makes no sense.
And they only added 1.3 and 2 times. So why can't they add 1.5, 1.6, 1.8? Like, I don't get it.
That the monkeys over at Sony just like, I don't know how to do it.
Oh, all right. Well, they did that. They also added some extra support for flexible ISO and Cine quick modes. So basically, I think they're making the FX3 and FX6 more similar, which actually makes sense because a lot of FX3 users might be upgrading to the FX6 or might be using AB cam or something like that. So I just wish they'd put the operating system of the FX6 in the FX3 for video, which is really kind of the R5C, which we're going to talk about. So that would be super cool.
Yeah.
All right. So in addition to that, there is a new product announced. Not in addition to that, but also the Rode came out with... there's another announcement about the Fuji X Summit, which I think was supposed to go on a few months ago, and then they delayed it. It's supposed to be mid-September now, and they're going to come out with a GFX 100 replacement and 3 GF lenses. So I don't know much about that system because it's really photography based, but Brandon, what are your thoughts on come out with a new GFX?
I've kind of salivated over that camera since it came out, like especially when the GFX 100 came out, that big blocky $10,000 camera. It was like, holy crap, medium format, this is rad. All the purists are going to be like, that's not really medium format. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, when the 100S came out, it was just so small. It was crazy to have a medium format camera in a body that small. Stabilization, autofocus, it was fast. I am pumped to see what a follow-up to that camera would be, especially for the price. But Fuji, again, if you're listening, I have a really good idea for you. You should just take like the GFX 50S sensor and put it in an X100V body with like a 40mm 2.8. You would crush.
That would be crazy. It would be expensive. And I think getting the lens small enough might be tricky too.
I mean, like a pancake fixed, I bet they could do it.
Yeah, but it's got to be really good optics. If that camera's going to be very expensive, so I'd want a really nice lens on it. But that would be super cool, Brandon, for sure.
Yeah, they would be the only one. A medium format, like point and shoot type of thing. That would be freaking sweet.
Which would make sense considering the success the X100V had. It's like next level X100V. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, hopefully Fuji. I don't think Fuji's watching this, but that would be cool. Pass it along.
I'm just gonna send it to him.
Okay. All right, so I think that wraps up news and rumors. Let's get on to the main discussion, which is, of course, the Canon R5C. Now, this is a camera. So this camera, I'll just say, is incredibly powerful, but yet so frustrating at the same time.
It's funny, like, I wrote down talking points, believe it or not, and my first talking point was like, it's insanely powerful. The second one, very frustrating.
I don't know what's more surprising, that you wrote down talking points or that they're the same talking points as mine. I'm not really sure. All right.
But it really is like the first time I shot with this camera, the feeling I got was, holy crap. Like the power that's in your hands in this super small body is like, I can shoot 8K 60 frames per second raw, and then with a flip of a button have possibly one of the greatest photo cameras ever made.
Yep.
Like in this thing.
Yep.
And then the first time I used it, it was like, there's a couple of caveats in here, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly a great way to start off the conversation. So before we get into the R5C, I think we need to talk about the R5 a little bit, because this is based on the R5, and part of the discussion is the decisions they made when they developed the R5C. So the R5 got announced in July of 2020, and it was released at a price of $3,900. Most of us know or remember the whole issue with the overheating, and in my opinion was a serious problem with the marketing, and that they were marketing this camera as a video beast. And in fact, it's a killer photography camera that has some crazy video specs on the side. So obviously we all know about the overheating and all the issues with that. But what the result was that Canon came out with the R5C in January of 2022, which was about a year and a half later, and that came out at $4,500. The price has fluctuated since then. It's gone up a little bit. Now it's a little bit lower. So I think after the R5 came out with the overheating, I think most of us thought, can we just get an R5 with a fan? Like, I literally
slap one on the back.
I heard people saying, you don't change anything. Just put a fan on the camera. Yeah. Like, we'd be happy.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But
many people said that.
But that's not what Canon did. So they went a little bit further with it. But before we get onto that, what were the things that were the main issues with the R5 for shooting video, Brandon? What were some of your gripes? Because you had the R5, you used it quite a bit.
Yeah. I used it a ton, and I bought it going into it with, this is going to be my professional work camera for photos. Video was very much like an afterthought. It was really cool that you could do all of it, but it was an afterthought. I would say most people are going to say the overheating, obviously. The codec, if you decided to use the 8K, would riddle your computer useless. It was basically, it made it inoperable. And then maybe the dynamic range and I/O, right? Like, because it still had micro HDMI, which is like just a shame. And then, yeah, the dynamic range wasn't that great. Highlights just not so bueno.
Yeah, I'd say number one was overheating because, and I'm talking for me personally, and probably for most people, because the 4K HQ, I think this was called HQ in that camera. 4K Fine was the later camera, same thing. It was the 8K oversampled 4K, looked absolutely incredible. And the problem is it overheated like super, super quickly. Inside, outside, doesn't matter. It would overheat like just not even recording. Like just the camera was on in that mode, it would start warming up. So I wound up using the camera in the line skip mode, which I didn't really love. I don't think it looked that great. And there's lots of workarounds for all this stuff. There's also a 30-minute recording time limit, which is still on the camera, which is
bananas.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like we talked about the codec, there's no C-Log 2. And they always say, just shoot in 8K RAW, and then you can interpret in your NLE as C-Log 2. But like the 8K RAW, as you said, Brandon, the files are huge. It chokes the computer. Like you have to run proxies.
You need a super computer.
Or you got to have a proxy workflow, and the files are like old school RAW, like massive Canon files. And so those were kind of my big beefs. And because no C-Log 2, the dynamic range was not there. And even in C-Log 3, the dynamic range was weak in the highlights, for sure. And of course, another gripe of mine, which you already mentioned, is micro HDMI.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we'll probably I'll save it for the R5C.
Okay. So
I'll just save it.
So let's first get on to talking about the biggest one, which is overheating. So obviously there were workarounds. So some people would record to a Ninja V because that removes the heat issue and also eliminates the 30-minute record limit. But you got to deal with the Ninja V, and you got to deal with the micro HDMI, and clamping onto the camera somehow, and all that stuff. And the other issue, which not a lot of people talk about, is that Canon log shooting externally is not the same as internally. Like, it's a different gamut. Like, the colors are different.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If you ever want to test this, grab one of the Canon cameras, like an R5, record internally.
Got an Ninja V.
And record internally, and then record in there. Like, it doesn't look, apply the same LUT or transform. It doesn't look the same.
Huh,
so
interesting.
Yep. So anyways, I don't think you can, I think the cinema gamut is like all jacked up. I don't remember all the details, but there's that. The other thing is some people were using the line skip mode, like I said, or using the crop mode. It has a 5-point-something K oversample in 4K in crop mode. But then it's like, I don't want to shoot in crop mode. I have a full frame camera. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then some people were using a speed booster with the crop mode. It's like, it's just...
It's the list of workarounds. Canon's almighty list of workarounds.
That's basically it, workarounds.
What is it? It's not a bubble chart, and it's not a tree. Is it just like the arrow thing that's like, if you do, those like meme things?
Yeah,
it's do you need full frame? If yes, go to here. If you need...
The flow chart or whatever it's called?
Yeah. It's like a flow chart. There's a Canon Cripple Hammer workflow flow chart.
So I think with the mindset of Canon customers and the way they sell things, it was like, well, if you need a video camera, buy the C70, right? That was sort of the... But like they came out and marketed it as a video camera and talked about all the video capabilities when they should have just been talking about the photo capabilities, because the camera is amazing for photography. All right, so fast forward a little bit of time, the overheating. So they came out with a firmware update in July of 2022. This was version 1.6. And this essentially eliminated the overheating. And there's a couple things I want to talk about this. I made a video about this. I had really mixed feelings. If you guys want to watch that, it'd probably be funny to watch later, because at the time I was like excited, but also frustrated. Now, the reason why I'm excited was, cool, the camera doesn't overheat. But it took 2 years. And for 2 years, Canon users who spent $4,000 on a camera really struggled with video and had to deal with all these workarounds for 2 years. So there's that. Also, there was also discussion about the fact that when they allowed the camera to run hotter and not shut off, that there was more noise issues because the sensor was getting warmer. So I didn't personally test this out, but I've heard this from several people. Have you heard about that too?
Yeah, I think I remember somebody mentioning it, and it kind of made sense. They're like, the image is getting noisier, but I didn't have the R5 at that time. I've had the R5C for, I want to say like 6 months or so. So I haven't had it for a while.
Okay, I did hear that from a few people, so I believe that's probably true. And I think that a lot of the reasons why their cutoff for when the camera overheated was based on the performance of the sensor. And as much as we all like get mad at Canon for these cripples, I think it comes down to them trying to preserve their quality whenever they can. And if the camera starts getting noisier than they want at a certain temperature, that's when they cut it off. That's my opinion about it. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think there's a mix of all these things going on. But what bothered me the most about this was the timing of this with the release of the R5C. So the R5C... Conveniently timed, because the R5C came out in January of 2022. So it gets announced in January, ships in like March, and then they have all their first bunch of sales through spring and early summer, and then they're like, here you go, R5, you don't overheat anymore, after everyone bought the R5C so it wouldn't overheat.
Yeah. It's very conspicuous.
All right, so is that just my conspiracy hat again?
No, I like followed the money. I used to be a hardcore conspiracy theorist, and then I was like, no, there's no conspiracies at all, and now I'm way back up there. If you got a camera that's overheating, and they're like, we'll just release this other camera. And then it sells like hotcakes, and you're like, all right, go ahead and release that firmware that kills the overheating.
Like they weren't gonna.
Of course, it's happening.
Like if they, devil's advocate here, if they were like, yeah, we had to fully test the camera. I'm like, 2 years? No, that's not true. So
we both know that Jim is down there in R&D, like, yeah, it's good.
Just with their firmware updates.
That was 18 months ago.
Yeah, you don't think that they tested all this a whole bunch before they released like their flagship camera? Like before they announced the camera, they knew what it could do. You know what I mean?
I keep saying like the Canon monkeys, but let's be honest, there's some real smart people over there.
Absolutely.
Testing the shiz out of it. Josh, there's like 300 of you in some basement wearing lab coats.
Way smarter than me,
testing
dude.
Cameras.
Way smarter than me. But they wouldn't have released that in like a month or two before the R5C, because who would have bought the R5C?
Yeah, exactly. They're like, oh, they fixed the problem. And they're like, and if you fix the problem, we don't need this, this behemoth.
I think we beat that up. Okay. So another thing about the R5C that I found really interesting was that it has more dynamic range than the R5.
Yes.
Even in XFAVC, like in the compressed codecs, not the raw codecs.
And let's be clear, this was at initial release. This wasn't even when they had released the firmware to up the dynamic range even more.
So this is so weird because it has the same sensor and same processor. Like how come we don't have that dynamic range in the R5? Is there special sauce in the Cinema operating system? I don't understand what's going on there. So I do want to test them because I have both cameras right now. I do actually I didn't do it originally. I might still do that. I want to see what the differences are. So I might get around to doing that. But frustrating for
Josh,
sure.
Hurry up.
Both, I'm wondering about C-Log 3. Like I thought it was limited by C-Log 3, but obviously they unlocked more dynamic range in the R5C somehow. So that's super weird.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those were the big things. Obviously the overheating and the unlimited record time. Obviously you get the Cinema operating system. And I think that to me was one of the biggest things about the R5C was that they put the Canon Cinema operating system in this camera. And I personally love it. How do you feel about that? I know you were used to the R5, but
yeah, I was used to the R5, so it took a little getting used to. However, I had a Canon C70, so I understood the menu system, but to have two completely different menu systems in the same camera was kind of a shell shock. You'd be like, wait a sec, what am I doing? But at the same time, I think that's one of the reasons the camera feels special in a way. Why it feels powerful. You're like, you're unlocking its final form or whatever. You just click over a button. It's like a whole different thing. You're like, oh, this is so nice to have such a dedicated menu to this one specific thing, which is video. I really like it.
I think a lot of the mirrorless users were frustrated by it because they weren't used to it. But personally, I prefer, as a videographer, to shoot in the Canon Cinema operating system than in the mirrorless operating system for video. And once you get used to it, you'll agree because you have way better monitoring tools. The menus are laid out to like really just have what you need in there, and it's not like some weird like adaptation of the photo side. So to me, that was probably the biggest innovation I saw in this camera because I think it's the only camera that really does do that. That it has like a totally separate operating system for video that it does for photo, and in my opinion, has made this really the first true professional hybrid camera because you flip it over to photo and it's a R5, which is one of the best photography cameras on the market. And then you flip it over to video and you have a full-on Cinema operating system. So what are some of the things, Brandon, with the operating system? I mentioned monitoring tools. Was there anything else that you really enjoyed about the Cinema operating system?
Okay, so I'm actually going to go with something that I miss. But hear me out. All right. So in the original R5 and video, they had presets. They had 3 presets for video and they had 3 presets for photo. And you could assign different frame rates to the presets, whatever. I'm kind of bummed that the R5C does not have that. However, the Cinema operating system is very fast. Like once you get used to it, you can navigate around it incredibly quickly. And so even though I'm kind of bummed there's no presets and I would still like them to do that, this thing is so much easier to navigate than the video side on an R5 that it's not as slow. Like you can make up a lot with just a couple of quick button touches. So I think it's really efficient. You can do the My menu. So like if you take all of the settings that you use the most, you can build your own menu out of it, but I would still like a preset.
So I always think that there's like in Canon, there's like a division in the building. There's like the cinema people and then there's the photo people. And they're not allowed to like talk to each other. They like keep them separated.
Yeah. It's like Muggles and the people at Hogwarts. They just like, they don't like you. You're a muggle.
I don't know if wait, who's the muggle? Who's the wizards here?
Right? Like, well, regular people are muggles, and so they're like less than people. Okay. And then you got the wizards.
Okay, but which one's the wizard in this analogy? Is it the cinema people or the photo people?
Probably the cinema people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out your analogy here. Okay. But
that's all right.
It just seems like they don't talk to each other. Like, why can't they like this was like the first time they were allowed to hang out and party. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or someone just...
It was a suggestion box. It was an anonymous suggestion box. All the video people put their stuff in. All the photo people put their stuff in. And then like the chimps at the top of Canon were like, all right, just put it all together. Here's the list. Slap it together.
But it's like they could do the custom mode thing, but like they're not going to because that's in the photo thing. That's not in the video thing. You know what I mean? So...
Is it really that hard?
I don't know. Maybe they start hanging out and have lunch together.
Preset one.
I know. All right, so there was some other criticisms about the R5C. One was they took out IBIS, which I personally didn't care about.
Me neither.
And especially because a lot of the RF lenses have great stabilization. And when you pair that with the digital stab, it works really, really well.
Yeah.
The other thing was the autofocus. So I remember when people found out that the autofocus was different in the cinema operating system than in the photo operating system, people lost their minds. And in reality, for a lot of situations, I actually prefer the autofocus system in the cinema system.
In the video.
Yeah. And I'll just say, let me just say, like, the face-only autofocus in the Canon operating system, cinema, is just absolutely mind-blowingly good. And if you don't know what that is, it focuses on a person, and then when it loses focus for whatever reason, like if it struggles, it doesn't just jump to the background like you see in a mirrorless camera. It just holds the focus until you can find the person's face again. So you never see it missing focus. What was your thought about the autofocus?
Yeah, I mean, initially I was like, oh, this is quite a bit slower, because I was used to it, like just being so snappy. But it wasn't until I got this camera. And I'm going to be honest, I used it for a little bit and I went, we'll talk about battery life and stuff, but there are a couple of quirks like autofocus, dynamic range, or not dynamic range, autofocus and battery life, where I kind of just shelved this for a bit. And I started using my C70 way more. And then the C70 had the face only autofocus. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. So then I went back to the R5C and was like, all right, it's not as snappy, so I just got to remember that. But I love that it's not jumping back and forth.
That autofocus system is incredible. And even like the C200, which is now, 6 years old, has it, and it works flawlessly. It's super good. So there are some modes that are in the R5 that are not in the R5C, like shooting animals and stuff like that, which, of course, the R5 is going to be better at. But for shooting people, interviews, talking heads, the face only is absolutely incredible.
So good.
So another thing I want to mention is the fact that this is the only full frame RF video camera, right?
Yep.
So I made a video about this too, that I was super excited about this camera because I own full frame RFL lenses. And yes, you can use them on the R5. Yes, you can use them on the R3, which I hadn't tried at that point. But to use a full frame camera in full video modes is super cool because those lenses are beautiful. And you can use those lenses on the C70, but you're cropping in, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you really see the full potential of those lenses. I thought that was a big deal.
Yeah, it's the 16. I mean, I just got this and like I'm using this a lot to vlog. You're like, wow, that's pretty overkill for a freaking vlog camera, but that's what I'm doing. All right. I tried it with the Komodo X. It didn't work.
He tried to like overkill the overkill. And now he's just going down one level to just overkill. Okay.
Just for fun. But And this little lens has been awesome, but for the most part, the 15 to 35, that lens is so good, and it just lives on this camera.
It's so big,
that lens kind of lives on all of my cameras, to be honest.
Yeah, I absolutely love that lens, and the 24 to 70 is equally as good. And yeah, it just lives on a camera for sure. And that on this camera looks absolutely stellar. It looks super good. So let's talk a little bit about the body design, Brandon.
Okay.
I kind of call this
Are you ready for me to have like a couple of massive come aparts?
Dude, this is what this whole podcast is about. So this is my brain like a Frankenstein camera, because
it is.
They took the R5, and most people know what this looks like, and then they just slapped a fan on the back and sort of extended it out. Now, it's actually not that much heavier than the original R5 because they took out the IBIS, but it definitely feels bulkier. Like, not when you're holding it by the grip, but it just feels like a bigger camera.
Yeah, it's got some girth to it.
Okay, so what are the let's get onto our gripes now with the R5C, because some of it has to do with the body design, right?
So much of it for me has to do with the body design.
All right, so what are your gripes with the body design, Brandon?
I'm just gonna go over them. Is that okay?
Yeah, dude.
I'm just gonna start pointing them out. Let's start with the biggest one. The absolute biggest one. You call this a cinema camera, and you give us micro HDMI. That's fucking stupid, Canon. There's no other way to put it than that is stupid. And we'll get to their reason later, but that was freaking stupid. So that only one thread here. It should have two. It's a cinema camera. It's meant to, like, so many people run this as a B camera to something else, or their A camera. It should have two. You cannot use the scroll wheel to adjust exposure like you could in the R5. This is like grayed out. You just can't do it. It doesn't work.
It's like that on the C70 too, right?
I can't remember.
Okay.
But you use this so much. It's so quick and it's so handy. And I can't remember if it's ISO or, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's ISO. So like this scroll wheel works, and the control ring works. This top one works. This one does not. And I don't, that makes no sense to me at all.
All right, so let's hold on. Let's harp on the micro HDMI for a second. So yeah, we all know that if you're a video shooter, you know why that's not a good thing to have. But their argument, from what I heard, which is like the lamest argument ever, was like, oh, but like this whole part of the camera is like the circuit board, and all the ports are like soldered onto it or whatever, and so they didn't want to redesign it and spend the R&D. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is a new camera, but like you put a time code port on here, you extended this whole thing out. You couldn't like put a full size HDMI on this somewhere, like.
Yeah, new EVF, new switch up here. Like, there's so many new things. It's like, who said that building the ultimate camera is worse than just giving us a half-assed attempt at the ultimate camera?
Frankenstein, dude. Frankenstein camera. I wish it also had two CF Express B cards and not CF.
I was just going to mention that.
Okay, yeah. There are some things I really do like. The EVF is fantastic on this camera. The screen is awesome for the size. Canon does a great job with EVFs and LCs on their higher end cameras for sure. The ergonomics and stuff, it does feel like a good camera in your hands.
Just gonna say.
Yeah, and they put a timecode port on it, which is crazy, and still no micro HDMI or no full size HDMI. The other thing that was a gripe for a lot of people was the photo to video switch time, which it did improve, but it was like 8 seconds at launch.
Yeah, it took a while. I mean, it's nothing like Komodo-ish, but it was.
Well,
it was like, this is supposed to be a fast camera.
Yeah, they should have gotten that better to begin with, because I think for people that really are using this as a hybrid, taking that time to switch can be really frustrating. And also on the R5, if you're in photo mode and you hit the, you can set the function button to hit record, to turn that to hit.
Yeah. You could map it to switch to video, like with one of these buttons.
Yeah, it records in the third preset. So you could like
press it and it
records in your third custom preset. So, all right. The other thing was the 8K RAW. So yes, it shoots up to 8K 60, but the RAW is just, as we said, it's so big. The codec is very heavy.
Massive file.
Okay. And onto battery life, which you've hit on before. So I think we can get upset about it, and we are upset about it. But the reality is, we have a cinema camera with a little photo battery. Like, think about how big the battery is in like a C70, and we're like, yeah, can we run this on this battery? Like, what do you expect?
Yeah.
I mean, the Blackmagic Pocket cinema cameras were running on these small batteries, and they didn't last very long.
No, they didn't. I remember the first time I took it out, you'd warned me. You're like, bro, the battery life's pretty bad. And I was like, okay. And I took it out, and I remember like I turned it on, and I was just kind of going through the menu, and I looked up, and like minutes were just draining.
Even when you're not recording.
I know. And I took it out. I think I just vlogged for like an hour. I was just shooting like an hour-long vlog, and I was like, dude, I went through 6 batteries. And it was like, wow. And that's what I meant. Like, you pick this up, it feels great, it looks great, it's so powerful. And this was, when it first came out. But initially you were like, there's no way I can use this. Like, it's unusable unless I have a massive battery bank in my pocket with like a USB-C running to it. And I don't want that for this type of camera.
Yeah, I think now also if you're shooting video on this camera, you're probably gonna use like a V-mount, right? For the most part. Or some sort of power bank or something like that. Because when I had this camera originally, I got a battery grip and I was trying to use it like that. And it was just that whole system, So nowadays, there's a lot of availability with power banks and V-mounts and stuff that are fairly affordable. And I think most people that are shooting video just plug it in.
Yeah, I know we'll dive into this. They came out with an update that makes the battery life better. Yep. I don't have to use a battery bank or a V-mount anymore, which is fantastic. We'll talk about it. But yes, if you're doing a heavy amount of video work on this camera, definitely get a bigger battery.
Okay, yeah. And I think the other gripes I had, of course, is no C-Log 2. And like, we're going to keep talking about this. But
we didn't even...
we're not going to let them off the hook with this.
Punch.
I think all Canon cinema cameras moving forward need to have C-Log 2. I don't think it's negotiable anymore. And I even think the R5C should have C-Log 2, but I don't think we're going to get it in that camera.
I agree.
And I wish this camera had more dynamic range. And I know in the update, which we'll talk about, they did add some, but I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't have more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I bought it knowing that it didn't have C-Log 2. But when the camera came out and it had a C on it, I was like, it should have it. And then they didn't put it in there. And it's like, Canon, why?
It's like the C200 discussion,
they said, it doesn't have the ability, or it doesn't have the
dynamic range,
processing power.
Yeah, they always say it's dynamic range. I made a great video about. I called it like, do we need a new log profile or whatever? I think we talked about on the podcast too, but
C-Log 4.
C-Log 4, but I don't think that. I think the main reason they said no C-Log 2 is that the camera the dynamic range of the sensor can't cover C-Log, the dynamic range of C-Log 2. But like, you can shoot in RAW and then interpret it as C-Log 2.
So I was going to ask that. Like, I don't know if this is a stupid question, because we get this comment a lot from people that are like, it doesn't have the dynamic range. So explain how you can shoot in RAW and then convert it to C-Log 2. And it absolutely has more dynamic range when you do that.
So I think this goes back to what I was talking about before with Canon saying, like, we're not going to give it to you because it's not to our standards, like with the overheating and the noise or whatever it is, or the RF third-party lenses. And so other than, when you compare this to like Sony that put S-Log 3, which is their highest dynamic range profile, in their 8-bit cameras, like 6000 series cameras, the A7 series, like those had S-Log 3, which had no business shooting. They did not have, and so Canon does the opposite, where they say, well, we know this can't do that, so we're not going to give it to you, but they let you shoot in RAW. Now, the reason why I think you can interpret it as C-Log 2 is because there is more dynamic range in there than C-Log 3. And so that's the only other option that your NLE is going to interpret that, is that as C-Log 2.
All right.
But it's not C-Log 2.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question really, but I think there's a lot of question marks about that still.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I'm still like, this is not satisfactory.
No, it's not satisfactory. That's totally true. All right, let's get on to firmware updates, because this camera has had a whole bunch, and Canon's been great about updating their cameras, especially their cinema cameras. They've added so much. So the first update I want to mention is what a lot of people refer to as the Netflix update. And that was version 1.031. And this one was really interesting because they actually applied, from what I understand, for Netflix approval and got denied. And then when this firmware came out, Netflix approved. And so, which most of us know doesn't mean anything, but it's a marketing thing for a lot of people. So this one was interesting because they said that they improved. This is what the actual update says: improves the image quality of Canon Log 3 when shooting in XFAVC or MP4 formats. So, Brandon, I remember when this came out, you installed it and you were pretty sure that there was a difference, right?
Yeah. On the higher end, in the highlights, there was a noticeable difference of dynamic range.
Which is just, again, back to what we said before. Why is there more dynamic range in this camera than the R5? And now there's even more. So I don't know. Either way, I'm not complaining they're adding more, but just give us C-Log 2. And then I don't know if maybe they just remapped C-Log 3 to like change the curve a little bit. Like, I'm not really sure what happened, but who knows?
Yeah. I'm not a camera tech.
And it was also interesting when the FX3 got version 2 firmware, then it was Netflix approved all of a sudden because it had like CineEye in it or whatever. And it's just funny that these companies are like making updates so they can get Netflix approval so they can market the camera better. I don't know.
It really only matters if you're shooting a certain amount of footage for your Netflix show with that camera, right? Because you can kind of use any camera as long as it's not more than like 10% of the total overall footage.
I don't know all the rules, but if you're shooting a Netflix original, which is what we're talking about,
yeah,
you have a different budget, man. Like I you know what I mean? That's like when Netflix gets involved and helps you make the movie.
Yeah.
At that point,
wait a sec, Josh, you don't want to shoot a whole Netflix movie on this camera?
Well, you could, and I mean, well, now this is Netflix approved, but you could shoot, I think you can shoot on a lot of things and then sell the movie to Netflix if you want. But if it's a Netflix original, then only certain cameras can be used. That's the way I understand it. I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments. All right, so the next firmware, which came out just recently, end of June, there was a couple of things in here which was great. First of all, they improved the switching time.
Was this the big one?
Yeah.
Was this the big update, just barely?
Yep. So the couple things were improved the switching time between video and photo mode. I think they reduced it from like 8 to 4 seconds or something like that.
It's pretty snappy.
Okay. The big thing is the power saving mode, Brandon. So what are your experiences with that?
It was about 4 seconds.
Okay, power saving mode, Brandon.
power saving mode. Okay, so for what I use it for, like I said, I use it pretty much for like a content, creator's camera. So I'm vlogging a lot, or if I'm going over to Vessel and I have to shoot some media and content for them, this is what I'm using. Originally, this thing would just gobble up batteries. It would destroy batteries. They come out with power saving mode, and I would say I can kind of go out now all day on a battery or two if I'm switching between photo and video. If I stay on video, I'm kind of good with like one battery, because it went from like 45 minutes to almost 80 minutes of battery life. So a pretty big jump. I'm super happy with it. However, there are a lot of caveats with power saving mode. One, you can only shoot in like the 10-bit XF AVC. Is that how you say it, Josh?
Yeah, XF AVC. Yep.
You cannot do any raw shooting whatsoever. Whether you want to use the Super 16 or the Super 35 modes, you can't shoot it. You also can't adjust the screen brightness for some reason in power saving mode.
Well, that kind of makes sense, but that's annoying. So
I don't know.
If you don't have the luminance turned up, can you see the camera outside? The screen?
Yeah, Canon screens are really good. I can.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I got good eyeballs.
Okay, so not that
They're
much.
Still working.
Not that much of a difference then. There was also, so it's good to see them improve that, but there are some caveats you have to keep them on. But I think most people are shooting in that XFAVC codec.
Yeah.
Most people are.
Yeah.
So they added some digital teleconverter functions. I haven't played with that at all. I usually don't bother with that stuff, but there's also improvement in autofocus. Add the the other stuff that we talked about, like in the C70s, so some of the other face detect modes and stuff like that. They also added the Canon 709 profile, which came out in the C70, which I actually really like for like live streaming, where you just need a really nice picture right out of camera that's got a little more contrast and saturation without having to deal with
Have you looked at how many profiles are on this camera?
There's a lot.
There's like 8 or 9.
I'm just really happy because I've never been excited about the baked in profiles that are in there. So I think this Canon 709 looks a lot better than the wide DR to me. So that one, I used it for streaming a bunch of times. I was happy with it. There's a lot of other little things in there, but it is crazy how much they keep updating the camera and actually listening. Like they reduced the switching time, increased the battery as much as they possibly could. They were probably sitting around like, how can we do this? And they said, oh, if we limit this, we limit that, we limit this, we can increase it. So I don't know. It's good to see that. All right. So trying to move on from all the firmware updates now, I think what I've been realizing about the R5C is that Canon is really leaning into this camera. And I think I heard somewhere that they sold more than they anticipated. So I wonder if they just didn't anticipate selling very much, or it really did sell that much. I don't know. We don't have access to numbers, but I don't know. What any thoughts about like how many of these are out there, like in terms of their expectations and stuff?
I have no idea how many are out there. I'm going to be honest. Like, I haven't seen too many people with them. There's another kid at my gym that actually shoots on it. He switched over from the R5 too. I don't know. I just remember when we were at NAB, that guy was, you had asked him, you're like, so what other cameras are we getting? And he was like, no other cameras. We're like, oh, really?
He was showing me the new $20,000 cinema lens. And I was like, hey, any new RF cinema cameras? He's like, and so when we were there, we were with Griffin Conway and he was doing a talk about the R5C. And, I think that was sort of the beginning of Canon really leaning into it more, because I've since then seen more influencer marketing, and not the same kind of influencer marketing that we see on new releases with other brands, but they're giving the camera to creators and paying them and saying, hey, go make something with this. And all the influencers are and creators are honest about, they're like, hey, Canon sent me this video is sponsored by Canon. I'm going to go shoot something cool with it. I remember seeing like Peter McKinnon did a video, and then a bunch of other people did. And I just think they're really leaning into it, and I think this is like their baby for the next couple years. They also just launched a whole series of training videos on the R5C on the Canon's on their like YouTube channel. So I'm sure that costs a lot of money to put all that together. I want to go check them out, but I just really feel like they're like, we're going to have this for a while. It's doing well. We're going to keep pushing it. So it is what it is. So with that, Brandon, I'm going to ask you this. Who do you think this camera's for? Because this is a really confusing camera for a lot of people. And I think that's why we're kind of deep diving into this camera.
Yeah, I would say this probably shouldn't be your first camera, even though, like, it could, right? If you got money to spare, great first camera, whatever. The only reason I say that is because the cinema operating system might be over some new people's heads. That's all. But, when this camera first came out, again, I can't tell you how much I actually really enjoy this camera now. But this camera was pretty frustrating when it came out. It's so powerful. It can do so much, but it can't do it at the same time. And so the point I'm trying to make is, even though this is truly like the world's first hybrid camera, it can do it all. When it first came out, you couldn't do it all at the same time. If you switch between photo and video frequently to get photos and clips, you would crush this camera. It would just run out of battery juice and it would die. But now with the updates, man, I kind of see this being like a do-it-all camera, like, especially if you're heavy into the video side. If you're really heavy into the video side that still needs photos, this is a camera for you. If you're really heavy into the video side and you never take photos, just get a C70, I think.
Okay.
What do you think, Josh?
I think that's a great way to put it. And I remember when it came out, and I was one of the few people I feel like that adopted it that early and bought it and started reviewing it. And I made a bunch of videos about it last year, but I called it the Swiss Army knife of cameras because it literally can shoot 8K 60 RAW and then can take amazing 45 megapixel photos. So I think what you're saying is definitely true about the C70, in that this camera is really only good if you need photography. Because I think if you are only video, I think the C70 is a better camera in most situations. It's easier to use. It just has all the features that you need. And I would probably grab that for a video shoot over the R5C because of battery life, NDs, XLR, all the stuff that, we all know about. But where I think this camera shines is the fact that it is a photography camera. And I could definitely see, as sort of quirky as this is, a C70 R5C combo as an A/B cam. So you're doing like a 2-camera interview setup or something like that. You could use the C70 and the R5C. I've mixed that footage together in my studio in C-Log 3 with similar lenses, and they cut really, really well together. You have to add a little bit of sharpening on the C70 because this thing's oversampled and it looks like crazy sharp. But if I could imagine if you were like a 1-man band or a 2-man band situation, and then you're doing an interview and then you got to pick up some B-roll or you got to pick up, do some photography, like your second video camera is an R5. So to me, I think that's really where this camera shines.
Agreed. I think you put that in a much better way than I did.
Well,
nice work.
You definitely set me up there with the video photo combo. So, but I do think that if you need one camera that does a lot, this camera does a lot. And as I said before, nowadays with the availability of micro V mounts and different, like V mount mounting solutions and stuff that are out there, switching.
You've got a great video on that, like small rig.
Yes, thanks,
solution.
man. Yeah, small rig makes a couple of parts. They made a new one that's like super minimal. So I could see if I had to go take this out with my C70 to do a 2-camera shoot, I put a V mount on the back, not think twice about it. And then if I need to pull it out for photo, I just pop off the V mount and I got a smaller camera.
Yeah.
So
yeah, if you don't mind rigging this camera with that small rig option, I say the small rig because to me that's probably the coolest solution I've seen so far. If you don't mind rigging this out, you're going to have like 12 hours of battery life in both settings, and you could just rip all day off this one camera.
Yeah. And I think also if you are doing higher end video stuff, you're wind up adding stuff to your camera anyways. You probably want a monitor, you need audio, like all this stuff. So I don't know. It's a Swiss Army knife. You can rig it up or down for different things. So I know you've talked a little bit about this, Brandon, but how exactly do you use this camera? Are you using this mainly for content creation and photography? Is that kind of what you're using it for?
Yeah. I've got cameras that I use for my own personal work. But when somebody hires me and wants me to go do an event or go do content, like I shoot for a restaurant here in town, this camera's coming with me. The other day we set up, basically I shot their whole menu. They're taking their menu, they're putting it on an app. We needed to reshoot everything. That meant like this camera's going to be set up. It can't move and it needs to be on for like 6 hours. So I took a small rig V mount, just clamped it to the tripod, plugged that in, put this in photo, did the whole menu. Then when we got done, they're like, oh, can we shoot some like video now? And I'm like, yeah, I have lots of battery, flip it over. And I put that in RAW just because it was like a really high dynamic range situation. We shot a bunch of stuff and it looked awesome. So for me, it was so nice to just like show up with like this in a 3-liter sling and be like, cool, I'm good to go.
That's crazy. That's insane, the amount of power that you can pull out of that one camera for that sort of situation. For me, when I got the camera originally, I was doing more content creation, like, for the farming channel and, even for this channel. And I bought this to use this as like my R5 that didn't overheat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the battery life was just like destroying me. And as I said earlier, I bought a battery grip. I hate the battery grip thing with the 2 battery. I just don't like that.
Well, let's be honest. We've talked about how dumb a battery grip is because they're like, let's get rid of this battery and give you one more. So in return, you've spent $500 for one more battery. It's the dumbest thing ever.
Yeah. So it didn't really work for me in that situation. For me, like the FX3 is a better option for that kind of stuff that I was doing, shooting outside in the sun, like on farms and stuff like that, and vlogging and things. But now I picked this up mainly to use in the studio because I can plug it in. It's full frame.
Yep.
It matches my C70. And it's just a really solid video camera. So for me, this has now become a studio camera for me, which all the pain points that I've had before don't really exist with this camera. So that's kind of how I plan to use it. So let's talk about the lineup now with Canon, because I think the R5C, as much as it's an interesting camera, really just straight up confuses the whole camera lineup going forwards. And it's really going to be interesting to see where the new releases come out and their price points. Because we've talked about the R5 II hopefully coming out soon. But like, where do they release that in terms of price and video capabilities? Do you know what I mean? Like this sits between the R5 and the C70.
And I think it could, like, it's going to throw a curveball into what they have coming later on down the road. My thoughts on the R5 II is that it's not going to come out until after the R1.
Okay.
That's just my personal opinion. Okay. I think the R1's going to come out because it's supposed to have this stacked new, 60 megapixel sensor. I can't see them releasing an unstacked version of that first. They probably want to sell as many R1s as they can. I think the R5 Mark II comes out after that with just a regular non-stacked 60 megapixel sensor. I don't think the R5 II will have C-Log 2, or then it starts cannibalizing, it starts eating into this camera, which they're trying to lean on. So, the R5 II is like, hey, if you want a heavy hitters photography camera, and they're probably going to pull back some of the video specs on that. That way they can continue to lean on this until the supposed R5C 2, which is supposed to come out in like 2 years.
All right. So your theory is the R1 and the R5 II will have the same sensor, but the R5 will not be stacked?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a different theory about this. Not saying yours is wrong. These are all theories. Like we have no clue.
Yeah. They're theories.
Yeah. So the R5 II is rumored to come out in 2024, and now there is rumors about the R5C Mark II coming out in 2025. So there's going to be a year between those cameras. I think that the R5 II and the R5C Mark II are going to have different sensors. I don't think they're going to be the same sensor. I think they're going to push the R5 II resolution up, is what I've been hearing, up to maybe like 60-ish megapixels, which would be very interesting. But I think what'll happen, and my theory is that maybe the R5C2 and maybe the R1 will have a similar sensor, because I think the R1 is not going to have 60 megapixels. I think it's going to have whatever the minimum amount of megapixels are for 8K video. It's like 38 or 40 in photo mode. And that way you don't have to do any oversampling, and you still get a fairly high resolution, and they can snap out like 40 frames per second or 50 frames per second in photography, or whatever crazy spec the R1 is going to have. And so if that does have a stacked sensor like we're theorizing, maybe the R5C2 will get a stacked sensor, which would be great for video. So, and maybe a little bit less resolution, so it's a little bit faster to read out. So I think that's going to be the big differentiator between the R5 II and the R5C2, is that the R5 II will have more megapixels than the R5C2. That's my thought right now.
Am I supposed to? Okay.
Yeah.
The only reason I would challenge you on that is I don't think the R1 is going to be a heavy video focused camera. I think it can do a lot of cool video stuff.
Okay.
But the reason I think it's going to have a higher megapixel sensor is because the A9 III is going to have it, the A1 had it, the Z9 had it, and this is their big bad boy that they've been talking about for the last like 3 years, going to the Olympics, and it's a sports camera, Yeah. Like this is really like, well, we can crop in till our heart's content, and it'll be super fast.
It's so interesting because cameras like the R3 and the A9 II are like mid-20s megapixel, 24 megapixel, right? And the whole theory behind...
Oh, that's right. I did say A9.
Yeah.
But...
And also the 1DX series were all 22, 24 megapixel or whatever. And so the theory there was like, we need a fast camera, fast rollout, sensor readout, and fire off a bunch of frames per second. And that's been how these cameras were designed. And then the A1 comes out that can do 50 megapixels at 30 frames per second. It's like, okay, now we need,
So can I give you a thought, like a little more on this theory? So the reason I think they can do it is because of a couple of cameras that have come out in the last year that I hope set a new precedent. Leica M11 monochrome, Hasselblad X2D. Do you know where I'm going with this, Josh?
Nope.
Internal storage.
Okay.
Both of those cameras have internal storage. One, it boggles my mind that cameras just don't have that anyway. Like, not as their only storage, but like the minimum storage, they should just have internal storage. I think the R1's going to have a terabyte of internal storage like the X2D. And if they do this and they do it fast enough, then they can really thump out a lot of photos with high megapixels.
Because it'll be faster than a card.
That's what I think
that
is
makes
gonna
sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And we have drones that have internal storage, like flying cameras.
Yeah, that's true.
We can't have
flying cameras.
We can't
are
have
in
internal
the sky.
storage in this. Like, it doesn't fly.
Yeah.
All right. So, what are some other things that you're looking for? I know we mentioned 2 CF Express B cards because those are the best cards at the moment, in my opinion. So,
yeah. You know what else I would like to see on cameras moving forward, especially with cameras you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on? I want some sort of like theft protection software. I turn it on. I know that kills like some of the speed, but maybe you could have like an away mode or something. I don't know, but something where you put in a pin, and if somebody steals your camera and they try putting it in, it doesn't work. I don't know.
Like Touch ID or something like that, where
something.
Okay.
Yeah. I would like to see them make an effort, because right now there's no effort on, hey, let's develop something, and whether it works or not, like let's just put in a try.
I know our phones, our laptops, they all have it, but like our camera that costs way more than that doesn't have it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. What I'd really like to see Canon do, and as we try to wrap this up, my big thought is I want to see a Canon FX3. That's what I want to see.
Yes. Yes.
So
I want a teeny tiny, powerful, low megapixel, high dynamic range camera.
So yeah, I think by the time the next thing comes out, maybe we can get a little bit more resolution. Maybe get like a 6K sensor or something like that. I'm not talking 8K, but maybe 6K.
That would be perfect.
Make it small, make it video focused. Maybe that's what the R5C2 is going to be. That's what I hope.
You know what, Josh? While you were talking about like having different sensors, I was like, I would be so pumped if they brought it down into like the high 20s or the low 30s and just focused on a crazy amount of dynamic range and made it really tiny.
I think that like 24 to 26 megapixels that we're seeing with these 6K sensors, I think that's where the sweet spot is right now. And maybe they got a faster processor in there to help with rolling shutter and all that stuff. So I would love to see a video-focused Canon small camera that shoots like cinema-level video. That's what I'd like to see.
Yep. I agree.
All right, so we covered a lot in this, Brandon. I know we kind of went off a little bit past the R5C, but I think we kind of extrapolated a little bit and talk about what we think is coming up with Canon. Hopefully everyone watching enjoyed this deep dive into the R5C. Maybe we'll do some other cameras. And if you have recommendations, let us know down below.
Yeah, and I would love to hear all of your gripes. So put those in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're like 12 subs away from the infamous 1,000 sub.
Just hit subscribe, doesn't cost anything, and we really thank everyone for all their support. It's been really great to see everyone cheering us on and keep us moving, because this is like a third level project for us. We all have a lot of other work we're doing, so we appreciate all of you. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you real soon.
Peace.